Well, stick with us a little bit longer, everybody. Kudos to you for sticking with us and listening about strategy at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. But the reason I'd like you to just listen in for a little bit longer is it's pretty exciting. Hot off the press just yesterday was the MLA 2030 strategic plan was released, and aligning to the updates that have come through from the Red Meat 2030 plan as well. So I've picked out pieces of the plan. There's a lot in there, but personally I actually think it's a really well-defined document for this next 5 years that, if you will no doubt be at home tonight having a read through it, is you will see that it's very clear what MLA is going to be focusing on, what are going to be our big, bold ambitions over the next 5 years, and it'll be very clear where we want to resource more heavily and really turn our attention to over the next 5 years. As you've heard today, it's such a huge industry, and MLA's just got such a lot of work going on, but we can't do everything. So we've picked the things that, based on our consultation with over 1,000 people that have given us feedback into this new plan, and 20 different workshops around the country, the real big ticket items that we think will shift the dial in the next 5 years. So what I wanted to start with, though, is the consumer. And something that's been drummed into me over the last 25 years working with Meat Standards Australia is the person sitting in the middle of the room. They're the person that they're the only person that puts money in the supply chain for us to all share in. So how do we know how to meet and exceed their expectations? Because as an industry where they've actually got a lot of options when they're shopping for protein, so we just can't afford to let them down. So everything that we'll be looking at through what our R&D investments should be around is, what are the insights coming from the market and the consumers telling us what they'd be willing to pay more for or be willing to reward us for the good job we might do. So I'm going to start there with the consumer. Now, we've got consumer insights coming out our ears at MLA. It's probably one of the great offerings we have for the industry, that we've actually got the capability to be doing very large-scale market insights, and we'd love to offer that as an offering from MLA for supply chains. To be able to tap into this as well. So I've cherry-picked things here in these insights that I think relate to the conversation today around sustainability. And so this one, these few that I'll just run through is, when we look at every year, for the last 15 years, we've been tracking consumers. We're really interested in those consumers that are increasing their meat consumption and those that are decreasing it. They're the ones that we think that we can probably keep influencing that sort of movable middle. Now, in the last survey we did, is that 18% of those consumers told us they were consuming more red meat. And when we dive into that, well, what is the reason that they're doing that? And it's largely a health-driven message. People even converting back from calling themselves vegetarians and actually starting to consuming meat are coming back generally because of the nutrition story and the health story we've got to tell about red meat. So knowing that, as an RDC, we have, obviously, you've heard lots about R&D and extension today. We've got a massive part of our company that's doing marketing as well. And it's these types of insights that helps determine what are the marketing campaigns we need to be out there in Metro Australia, really convincing people to eat more red meat. Very important, though, we understand why are 24% of those consumers saying they're consuming less red meat less often. Now, this is something that's largely out of our control, but the cost of living pressures, whilst that may feel like an overused term, is absolutely just front of mind when consumers are thinking about red meat and putting red meat in their shopping basket. And you'll see there's quite a big difference in a jump there when it goes from cost down to then where does health and environmental concerns. They're there, but at the moment, cost of living or expense of red meat is right there. But that doesn't mean that we can't get red meat in the shopping trolley. It means we just need to be more innovative about how we're thinking about doing that. So how do we use the whole carcass and position the right piece of meat for the right purpose for that consumer? And it's really easy for them to make that choice that red meat is good value, it's convenient, and it'll meet their expectations when they take it home. When we hone in on very specific topics with these consumer surveys, and when we've talked about sustainability with consumers, this is for Australian consumers, what is the statement of how important is sustainability to you? And you can see that from somewhat important to very important, extremely important, over 90% of consumers are saying it's very important to them. It's interesting when you dive into that, well, what does sustainability mean? And it's something that I want to pick up on too as we go through this presentation, because sustainability is much more within the MLA strategy, it being about the environment. That's one component of it. But as the agenda has been split up today, we think there are just so many more parts to that about how do we create a sustainable industry, and the environment's part of that. And when we dive a bit deeper with consumers on their definition of sustainability, it gets pretty interesting as well. Because it's not always about the environment they're thinking about too, but they're thinking about things like waste and recycling and sustainable packaging. So they're really interesting insights as well as to what we might be out doing in addition to the things we're doing in the environment. Now, so we have such a luxury position where we've got the opportunity to send our meat all over the world, and it's not something we can take for granted. And when consumers around the world see this Aussie beef and lamb logo, we're very lucky that they associate, we've got an established position in the market around what that stands for. You can see that I've highlighted out in darker green where environmental sustainability sits there, which is right up there in top factors there. But you can see right at the top, and again, this is something we just can't take for granted, is that we're known to be safe. We're high quality, we're fresh, and it's trustworthy. So they're all things that are fundamentals, and we continue to use all the credentials that we can provide from our industry to continue to sell that story internationally. And we hold a really high position in other countries, against our competitors in a lot of other countries, when we talk about specifically environmental sustainability. So if this is asking consumers in those markets, when you think of beef from this country, where does Australia sit? And you can see it's in a lot of our big export markets, we're number one. So I'm going to move on now to thinking about how do we use those insights, and how is that informing what we will do through the MLA strategic plan. I'm pulling out what we're calling the big, bold ambitions over the next few years. And the first one, I will start with the environment. So we see the role of MLA and the R&D and the extension that we do being able to contribute to Australia's net zero ambitions. We've invested over $100 million to date in our ambitions chasing, putting research, development, and now really accelerating the adoption around research into methane emission reductions and increasing carbon storage, and the systems that surround that as well. And we're not backing off that. So we'll be continuing to accelerate our adoption of those technologies, but also continuing to invest. And most of that investment's not using producer levies. It's largely using private investment that's coming to us that we're able to match with Commonwealth funding, which has provided, I've personally witnessed over the last, since 2017, where we really embarked on this, a huge level of enthusiasm and motivation around getting in place new R&D that will get us towards these net zero ambitions. Now, a little bit differently though, for the next 5 years, we've identified that we know the importance of ruminants in the environment, but we really want to tell that story properly with the right accounting methodologies that are in place. And so we've launched that, where we're completing this biogenic carbon cycle program. Again, building on what we've already done to date, but to allow us to get a really deeper understanding of the true net position of beef in working in this, in identifying all the gaps or the improvements in accounting that needs to happen to account for the whole carbon cycle. And that's including thinking about all the carbon sinks that may not be accounted for right now. And we're moving towards much more about performance indicators around emissions intensity per kilogram produced as well. In talking about resilience, environmental or climate resilience of our businesses as well, whilst we're investing in R&D around new and novel ways to reduce, or you've heard about feed additives to reduce methane emissions, we've got big investments in genetics that will give us new breeding values around methane. We don't have to wait for that stuff to happen or become commercial ready. We can get started right now with some really great, really scaling up the adoption of best practice land management, animal management practices, looking at the silvopastorals work we looked at before, how we can diversify incomes, how do we optimise the finishing of animals through the lot feeding sector. So there's things we can get going with right now that will have environmental benefits. And that'll be the theme you'll see in the MLA strategy, is that it's very productivity led with environmental and sustainable benefits through a supply chain lens. That's probably the way I would describe our strategy over the next 5 years. In the environmental sustainability space, We've already spent time and resources in developing a number of systems, things like calculators, the Environmental Credentials Platform, the Australian Fee-Based Monitor, Carbon Edge workshops. So in the last couple of years, we have developed these. We're ready to really step them up and scale them out and get being able to support producers to be able to collect the data in a consistent way, in a credentialing system, if they choose to share that up and down their supply chain. The next bold ambition that I'll call out is what we're going to do in the area of genetics. Genetics is a long-term game, however, and then we've done a lot of research. In particular, we've spent $50 million, again with partners, on being able to deliver multi-breed breeding values to the industry. And that work is really coming to fruition in the next 12 months, where we've done enough research to have enough data to get multi-breed genetic evaluation to be commercial ready. Now, what's the importance of that is that, in particular, for the sheep industry is already working like that. For the beef industry, we're very much breed specific, and has been excellent in driving genetic gain. This is very focused on the commercial producer sector that is really looking to, regardless of breed, I just want to have the most productive, profitable, efficient production system, and I want to choose the best animals that's suited to that. And at the moment, we actually can't give that information very easily. So this will allow us to really tap into, equip, producers with transformational genetic tools that allow them to make really confident breeding decisions as part of that whole farm system. Now, this one is quite close to my heart, given how much work I've done in Meat Standards Australia, but I am super excited about the role that value-based marketing will play in creating a sustainable industry. We've had in place for a long time eating quality grading system through MSA, and we're doing a good job of that, and we are seeing the premiums to producers grow year on year on those producers that can deliver quality and get rewarded for it. But in addition to that, what is true carcass value? Because there's more to eating, more than eating quality, because there's a yield component to that too. There's carcass health. So there are carcasses coming through the processing sector that have got diseases and defects. They're actually compromising the amount of product that can be sold from them. And there's this massive emergence of brands that have come over the last 10, 15 years that have all got their own specifications and story to tell. So that's an overlay too, and these are all adding value. And the other credentials like sustainability or environmental credentials that one animal might carry. Now, when we have that as a recipe that's carried through with each animal, then we can really start to objectively measure what true carcass value is. Now, this is just, so all these dots on here are all the single carcasses that we've graded for MSA this year already. But we've divided it into quadrants, and I'm really just using it as a sort of a concept to start to think at its very simplest, how do we get better at really describing true carcass value and move towards value-based marketing? And so we've got in this red quadrant, these are all the carcasses that have got the highest eating quality out of the population this year, plus they're also high-yielding animals. Like it's kind of like the unicorns up there in the corner. Down here, though, we've got animals that have got lower quality, and to some right out the end here is carcasses that have got most of the cuts in that carcass wouldn't meet consumers' expectations, and they're also low yielding. Yet if hypothetically, we know there are lots of programs out there that are awarding producers with price differentials already based on quality and a few other credentials, but hypothetically, if all these animals were all the same carcass weight and they all turned up at once and paid on an average price, there are carcasses in there that have been well overpaid, and there are carcasses in there that have been well underpaid on their true carcass value. So this is the shift we love to work with industry on in moving towards true value-based marketing pricing signals. And we've been a little bit of hamstrung in being able to do that in the last, up until now, is because whilst we've been able to do MSA grading, and we can continue to improve on that with objective carcass technologies, there are things like yield we haven't been able to do. We've been able to use some proxy equations, but right now we've actually started to get commercial access to tools that can actually give us very accurate readings on the amount of meat, fat and bone in an animal and tell us the true yield of that animal. We're working on technologies that will be able to do offal detection and tell us about the carcass health of that animal. So now this is really unlocking and live animal stuff as well, so we can predict performance before they even enter a feedlot. So we're entering in a whole new area of sophistication that will allow us to be very objective, value-based marketing. And that it's really important, though, that information we collect feeds all the way back down the supply chain. Associated with that is hopefully pricing signals. But up until recently, the information was stopping at the last owner. So when I was talking about we want to equip producers with genetic tools, in a lot of cases, carcass feedback has not been flowing to the person making a breeding decision. And unless there's some great relationships happening in the supply chain, there's really been a real gap in the data there, until now. So my feedback is a system that's already been in place for a little while, and we would expect this year that every single MSA graded carcass going through MSA will be going in through my feedback with a yield measurement and being able to get back to the breeder as well. I'm now just going to pull out a couple of strategic priority areas that I think relates to today's conversation, but there are many more when you open up the strategy tonight. And so those couple of things are, so an area we call investing in natural capital and land productivity. And these are, if I like, the fundamentals, if you like, of a whole farm system and what we can be doing to support industry and the research gaps, but also the adoption. And there's nuances depending on where we are in the country, and we use our consultation process with producers around the country to let us know what is important and what's actually holding them back from being even more productive and profitable. And these are some of the call-out areas of soil health. Feed-based optimisation is really rising to the top. Sally that talked about our adoption program before, was given the challenge of if the adoption team in MLA put their heads towards what is something we could do on a national scale that would benefit all producers, and we really drive hard on adoption, and we landed on optimising the feed base. Now that might sound like a fundamental, but we've also got the literature to support that is one big differentiator between a profitable and non-profitable production system. Reproductive performance in the north and pasture utilisation in the south has really stood out through our producer consultation. And MB2 that you've heard from Tony is that one of those programs addressing reproductive performance. The token sheep has made it into the beef sustainability, but all the mixed farmers out there. But animal wellbeing is you'll probably never see an MLA strategy without animal wellbeing called out, because of just how important it is for us, for our productivity, but also for our consumers around the world. And what does that mean from what MLA will be doing? It's largely around how do we keep improving our best practice on husbandry procedures, how do we make pain management more accessible as well, and continue to support the uptake of that. Feedlot sector in this category is thinking about how do we help with the adoption of shade. There's been a lot of work to suggest that shorter lairage times will result in benefits for the feedlot, but also for the quality of the product as well. Biosecurity is one of those areas that we just can't take the focus off. As we all know, we've got this access to so many countries around the world, and it's not until we potentially jeopardise that or it's compromised of how much impact I think we'll realise that it's having. So we're doing a gap analysis at the moment to help inform what the big R&D gaps might be, and it might be around how do we better control invasive species. We're already having some pretty great work being done in vaccine development. That's certainly been accelerated in the last few years with foot and mouth and lumpy skin disease certainly coming to the forefront in what we weren't expecting. So we've gone faster there as well, and continue just obviously to make sure that we've got that maintain that trade access in everything we're doing. Now there's always a people part that's underpinning the whole lot of this, and this means a couple of things that MLA tackles this in a few different ways. Working with community leaders in how do we develop leadership programs, so we've got community leaders advocating for what we're doing as an industry, actually direct community communications so people are aware of the good work we're doing, don't feel guilty about buying our product, but also from a producer perspective, you've heard Sally talk about today, but our livestock advisor sector is just not big enough for the ambitions we've got to accelerate adoption. We need more livestock advisors, or we need to be smarter about how we're doing that and maybe collaborating with the other industries where advisors are well accepted as part of their business decision making. Something that's come through the consultation for this 5-year plan is about the importance of workplace safety, and when I saw that today in the materiality assessment, it really validates the need for us to really understand what's the role of MLA in that space. And it seems to be, it's really, the consultation suggesting it is having a big impact on people's bottom line there. So you've already seen this. I'm putting this here to emphasise this is how we do adoption in MLA. We take everyone on this path, and every R&D project that we do as well, we look at how does that R&D project embed this pathway in there. So we're not really going into any R&D these days that doesn't have a well thought out plan of adoption from the very start. So coming to lastly, though, when we're thinking about carcass utilisation, so I've spoken a lot about on-farm things, but there's the rest of the supply chain, and having worked again in MSA for so long, I realised the value of working up the supply chain and with processors and brand owners to also value what producers are doing on farm, so we can unlock the value there as well. So instead of having a push model, having more of a pull model and having the supply chain value what's happening. And so this is a space where we do spend time working further up the supply chain with processors and brand owners and looking for what, at the moment, 20% of the carcass is currently giving us 80% of the value. But then we could really change that. And by looking at things like, we've called out hides today, we've shown that you can actually extract collagen out of hides, and being told it's one of the best quality collagens in the world, the Australian collagen, and turning it into some of these products that are now commercialised into the markets like the US, where it's predicted to be a $1 billion market for these types of health products. And using the big macro trends that are coming from around the world of how we can adapt red meat to fit into the ageing population. Or people that don't want to potentially sit down to a steak but really want to get a protein intake. Where does red meat fit in that these days as well? So that's where things like these protein bars, and different ways of serving red meat and providing that health message, or the reason people want to eat red meat, but in a different way. So I guess I'll just finish here in that the real theme of the MLA strategy going forward is how do we create and capture value for the whole industry to continue to being productivity-led and lead us down to being a really sustainable industry. So I've spoken about the importance genetics will have, but that decision being made at the genetic breeding program level, the day that person makes a decision on the genetics, it has a huge impact on what happens here at the consumer level as well. And so providing producers, or putting tools in the hands of producers that allows them to make the right decision, or a good decision to optimise the production of that animal, to optimise its finishing. What can we do in processing to make sure the product's never compromised, to meet or exceed consumers' expectations? And then use those consumer insights to feed back down the supply chain as well, and continually informing how do we continuously improve and adapt what we're doing to keep increasing the value of what we're producing. So thanks, Jacob, wherever you are.